I came across a whole host of sites. I've posted a link to one of them above. Now, yeah, you might say the BBC can't always be trusted. I think you'd have a difficult argument in that, but people can click on that and see what they like.
It's better than Fox News.
But no, Hamza, it is not the issue of what the penalty of rape is. You shifted the ground there. I'm not going to allow you to do that. We bring it back to what you said earlier. You said that the death penalty, in your view, was appropriate for blasphemy and apostasy. Now, don't try and say, oh, well, you know, what about rapes in European countries and whatever? No.
Let's try blasphemy. I want to touch on blasphemy.
I said violent apostasy when it's killing other people.
I'm interested in blasphemy because blasphemy doesn't...
Can I clarify?
Blasphemy doesn't hurt anyone, right?
And neither does apostasy.
Yeah,
blasphemy
right.
And apostasy should not be criminal because they are not violent. Violence is criminal. Violence should be criminalized, yes. But apostasy should not be because apostasy is not violent. Neither is blasphemy. Blasphemy is a victimless crime. Apostasy is just realizing that you know more than you did.
Sure. Well, guys, just to clarify again, I've mentioned at least 3 times. The view that I take, if the apostate turns violently against the community.
Okay. Take out the violence. Non-violent apostasy. Is it ever acceptable to kill a human being for any crime at all?
The view that I take is that the violent apostate is the one that is a crime. The other one is not.
The word yes fits in here much shorter.
Yeah, well,
is it acceptable to kill a human being for what they do or do not believe ever? Regardless of the other circumstances.
No, it's not acceptable.
Actually, you know, the problem with the only violent apostates argument, I mean, I know that you, I've argued with many Muslims and cited al-Tabari and Ibn Ishaq and Sahih al-Bukhari, and one by one they've, like the Russians when Napoleon was invading, they burned down their cities so that I can't use them against the supplies there against them. But here's the thing, as many of those as you'd have to explain away, I mean, you basically have to eliminate all of them to get rid of the precedent of Muhammad, his companions, and his successors using violence preemptively against people who were never Muslims, and also using it against people who had left the religion and where there was no record of them engaging in any violence. They just left and didn't look back.
Sure. At that time.
Can I just? I will.
No, wait. I really want to hear the answer.
Wait.
To that,
I will. Yeah, I know you will, and I will do it. But again, I've got notification that my 4-hour time limit is up on this video call. I'm going to end the call and start it straight away. Don't go away. We will be back.
Do we want to take a bathroom break while that's going on?
It won't last that long. We'll be straight back.
It's Tony. He when he reset it.
Okay, not a problem. I'll be going. Hamza, I really didn't do that deliberately. Honestly, I just got that message. So please, Abisma's point.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we look at violence or physical violence in Islam, we have to see that it comes under a category called jihad. As you well know, it's a very well-known used term in the West. And what you have to understand that the practices of jihad under the Islamic tradition and the actions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, come under 2 categories. And the 2 categories under the category of jihad is a defensive jihad and an offensive jihad. Now, the defensive jihad is, you only have to really rationalize it. It's like in line with Article 51 of the UN Charter that every single or collective has a right to defend themselves. Now, the contention by most people, including yourself, is like, oh, there's an offensive jihad element. Now, jihad in and of itself is not just a physical struggle. It's more of a political, social struggle as well. The maqsad in Arabic, which basically means the objective of jihad, is actually to have a free pathway to communicate Islam with the wider society, because what the Muslim community views, and this is in a very hypothetical scenario that there's an Islamic state, which I don't believe there's an Islamic state, but if that was the case, that offensive jihad is basically a means to remove the obstacles to this communication for da'wah, which basically means the propagation of the Islamic faith. That doesn't always have to end violently or physically, and it doesn't kill, and there's a lot of conditions to that. For instance, you can't kill trees, you can't kill women, you can't kill children, you can't kill old men, you can't kill monks. It's only armed combatants. So it's basically something similar to liberal interventionism. Liberal interventionism is a well-known foreign policy concept that you could basically invade or kill other armies in order to basically intervene. Yeah. So essentially, it's similar to that. And also, what we would argue is one of the main reasons that the Islamic entity used to do that was actually to remove oppression. This is why there's many like almost German poets. They used to write in Europe, you know, they used to pray that the Turkish horse would drink from the river Rhine. This is why the Jewish historian Zayn Zohar, he basically said when the Muslims crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, the Jews saw the Muslims as liberators. You have the academic study by A.S. Tritton called Umar and his non-Muslim subjects.
I think we're drifting off subject here.
Yeah, I'm
Very
just asking
far,
questions
yes.
about
Hamza, the
every time I'm on a roll and I sound good, you stop me, man.
I know.
That's because you're rambling on irrelevance.
I want to.
I mean,
one second, then. I just want to. Thunder was right. I think we have moved somewhat off topic. Let's get back to this issue. Okay. Now, if Sharia courts in other countries are imposing the death penalty, what I want to understand from you. And as I say, I can provide with.
Guys, can I stop you? Can I go for a wee wee?
Well, no, please.
wait, hold on.
I want you to address.
It's only human to allow him to use the restroom.
I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that.
My son says, Baba.
Okay, sorry. I do apologise, of course.
Okay, just give me 2 minutes, yeah? Because Muslims, we have to wash ourselves off. Not that you may be.
So we're still.
I'm also conscious of the time. I don't know how long I really want to keep this going on. I do want to wrap it up, but I think that the closing point that I wish to make is that it's one that Thunder touched upon before. It is that even if his interpretation of Sharia law is somewhat different to other people's, the fact is that Sharia courts are looking at the same book and coming up with death penalties, and as I say, I would just like him to confirm again, if he hasn't done it enough already, that he thinks that is an appropriate sentence to be.
I would like to touch on 2 points. The first is the one that Almighty touched on, which is Muhammad, who is supposedly the guy who has the most insight into Sharia, was all for the proactive use of killing apostates. And if it was okay for Muhammad, then why isn't it okay for everyone else?
I mean, I suspect we know what the answer is, but I don't want to preempt it.
Yeah. And the second one is this. I really want to go on to blasphemy because, yeah, particularly sort of how many copies of the Quran do I have to burn before I should be sentenced to death?
Okay. Well, I think once we've touched those issues, I know I had another caller waiting. I'm somewhat reluctant, given the time, to bring you into the call. I don't know, what do people think? Should we get one more caller in? It is an hour and a half after when we should have finished.
Yeah, well.
We'll see. We'll see how we get on. I'm certainly getting a little bit tired now, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wait for Hamza to come back, and then we'll try and pick up where we left off.
What's really amazing to me is we've been like 280 people watching this show. I really expected to have like record numbers for this show.
Yeah, I mean, there may be a number of reasons for that, and one of which may be the fact that people now realise that they can actually watch the show on YouTube, because all shows are now uploaded, hopefully in high definition and with a much better sound quality. And I've certainly personally received a couple of messages saying, "Oh, thank God, I can watch it on YouTube now rather than actually having to be there live." So that may be one reason, but like you, Aaron, I'm somewhat surprised that it's...
Yeah, especially since somebody said with zero notice, what did you expect? I mean, we did do a promotional video for this 2 weeks ago.
And also, when you say zero notice, I mean, we're here every 2 weeks at the same time.
Actually, we've been here every week for the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, I mean, people, I don't know. Well, that's obviously something we need to look into. If people are saying, "Oh, I didn't know about it," then sure, send us a message to any of us, Aaron, Thunder, myself, Mighty, through YouTube.
Yep.
We do read things. We might not necessarily respond to all of them, but we do read them.
Well, somebody must have a point about the marketing if they're still not figuring it out after Skepchick and Ferengula and all these other sites post, my invitation to Hamza to be on the show and still nobody sees it. I guess they must have a point.
We should have stood on the top of a hill and told people that bandits were attacking.
Works every time. Yeah. After getting divine revelations from.
Hi guys.
Hey.
You're back. I've just got. We're going to try and bring this to a close fairly soon, Hamza. I just wanted to clarify one point and make sure that we're in agreement on this, and then I think Thunder's got maybe one point.
I'm sorry, DPR. If we're short on time, we had that one last guess. Peace to you all. Let's try to get them on.
Yeah, we'll certainly do that. I just wanted to confirm with you, Hamza, just so there is no misunderstanding about that. The situation is that there are certain, and you appear to have frozen for me. Is everything still working all right?
His video periodically freezes.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Has audio.
Whether you agree with it or not, and I think you've already answered to some extent this question, but whether you agree with it or not, you have to accept that there are some courts operating under sharia law that are reaching judgments which, as I say, you may not be satisfied with, but they include the stoning to death of adulterers, blasphemers, and so on and so forth, right? So that may be not your interpretation of sharia law, but you've got to accept that this does happen. And how can you say that your interpretation is better than theirs?
Just like you could say, the only way we know that a judgment in British law, for example, is a good judgment is because we have appeal courts, we have a assurance body, etc. Unfortunately, in these countries, we don't have that type of assurance body. If we were to have one, it would be similar to like any other legal system, that just like the West.
Yeah, Hamza, your video's not showing.
Not only does that not answer the question, again, you're just shifting ground. Do you want to actually try and answer the question?
Yeah, okay, it's just another variation of the question, why is your religion better than other religions? Assuming you can answer that to our satisfaction, and not to get distracted, but I don't really feel that you did, within the religion, within the deen, which sect and which interpretation, which madhab, which jurisprudence and so forth. It's basically a variation of the same question. How do we know that your interpretation is better than the others?
Well, it's basically because we refer it back to the two traditions, which is namely the Quran and the Sunnah, the prophetic.
And these other people don't?
I should point out that you did put a little bit of space between yourself and the Sunnah when the issue of apostasy came up, because there are a lot of verses about preemptive strikes against nonviolent apostates, and I think seems to me that's why you anticipated casting aspersions on at least some of the hadiths. So if someone else took all those hadiths and didn't make any attempt to declare them to be inauthentic with any agenda in mind, I would say that theirs would be more accurate.
Yeah, I mean, see, just like I said before, like we have kids in England when they go to scholars and they say, but Sheikh, scholar, there's this particular tradition and it says this. And the scholar always replies, since when was Islam just one particular tradition? So the point is...
I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting the interlocking... I mean, for example, there are a lot of stories from the Hadith. There was this one story about a goat eating getting into the house and eating portions of Uthman's authenticated or official edition of the Quran when he compiled it during his caliphate. Now, that's a lone verse, and it's kind of a silly story, so I wasn't going to bring it up because... it's sort of easy to take a single hadith and get rid of it. But we're not talking about one particular tradition. We're talking about, of the six primary Sunnah collections, there are a great deal of verses. And this is just like, many different interlocking. And if you look at, for example, the way Muhammad al-Bukhari put these together. It's surely a method that's going to include some flaws, but what's interesting is Muhammad al-Bukhari used the same approach to examining his religion and the life of the Prophet the way that I would, which was you use, even with these stories, if that's the only evidence you get, you make the most of it and try to decide, okay, from what we know, how many different interlocking stories do we have? If someone gives a narration and then that turns out something's factually inaccurate, it's tossed out, and then that person's testimony is never used again. So while I'm sure that there are some flaws that have gotten into it, frankly, I trust Muhammad al-Bukhari's method of investigation far more than I will ever trust a Moses or a Jesus or a Muhammad who says that they have divine revelation.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, while I'm sure that there are some hadith that are inauthentic, genuinely, and then there's some hadith that are admittedly weak, I will say that, even if they contain some really juicy bits that I'd like to use against the religion, quite frankly. But it just seems that the overwhelming narrative from the Sahih collections, the other four collections, the official histories, is one that is much harsher and much more casually violent than the interpretation that you seem to have. See, when we sort of back you into a corner and want you to sort of nail your colors, post your colors to the mast, there's this moment of squeamishness where you say, well, we throw them off a cliff, and then that goes back to what DPR was saying, in that I think that you are a more moral person than the entity that you worship, because you have some hesitation before throwing people off a cliff, but apparently the divine forces that have ordered you to do so don't have this hesitation, don't feel any pity or sorrow or remorse at the thought of throwing someone off a cliff.
No,
so it seems that the harsher.
Almighty, I'm going to bring in the last caller. I do apologise, but
well, I think he should be able to respond before we bring in the next caller.
Sure. If you wanted to respond, Hamza, please do. But then next caller, and then we'll have final statements.
Yeah, basically, the thing I like to say is this: is that it's very nice the way you put it, very rhetorical. But in reality, look, let's look at it from a social constructive perspective. In Tibet, in the 1930s, according to certain literature, what they used to do is when they had newborn babies, they used to dip them in freezing cold water. For the Western mindset, we'll be like, oh my God, that's absolutely barbaric and crazy. But they argue, they say, wait a minute, if they couldn't survive the freezing cold water now, they would die in the Himalayan winters. You may disagree with that, whatever the case may be, but Buddhists, especially Tibetan Buddhists, are more compassionate than the fellow Westerner. Yeah, we know this because the tradition is highly compassionate. Yeah. So the point here is... I
disagree. I'm sorry. The Dalai Lamas in the medieval era used to pluck out people's eyes and chop off people's feet. That's really more of a modern perception. They were extremely brutal.
Who were?
The Dalai Lamas and the Tibetan monks. I mean, this is kind of a blind spot. There's a lot of outpouring of sympathy for Tibet because of their situation, but the Dalai Lamas were horrible people. If the current Dalai Lama is in fact a reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lamas, we should put him on trial at The Hague. That's all I'm saying.